The millionaire's son lost the spark in his eyes after the accident. No nanny could make him smile again, until a simple woman arrived at the mansion and did something no one expected. Her gesture changed everything, and led the millionaire to take an action he never imagined he would have the courage to take. The sound of the private elevator arriving at the 27th floor was an almost imperceptible noise, a whisper of technology and exclusivity that Henry Ashford barely noticed in his daily life. On that rainy autumn afternoon, however, the faint hum seemed to scratch at the silence of his Upper East Side penthouse. Through the security system's monitor, he watched the brushed steel doors slide open. A young woman with her hair tied up under a vibrant yellow scarf was pushing a wheelchair. The chair, however, was empty. Henry frowned. The agency had promised the best, a specialist in child and adolescent care with impeccable references. He had expected someone older, perhaps with a clinical, efficient air. Instead, he saw a young woman who looked like she had tied a piece of Midwestern sunshine to her head. Her audacity, however, was what truly disarmed him. Before the housekeeper could greet her, the young woman stepped forward with surprising firmness, her voice clear and without hesitation. "Good afternoon. I'm Sophia. I need to see the room before I meet the boy." Henry, the man who commanded meetings with international investors and moved millions on the stock market with a single phone call, felt a wave of irritation. It was a breach of protocol, an inversion of the order he so prized. Everything in his life was meticulously planned, from his business deals to the sterile environment of this glass-walled apartment, where every designer object occupied a precise place and nothing seemed truly alive. He rose from his Italian leather armchair, his grey suit perfectly tailored, and walked to the foyer. Curiosity, however, battled with annoyance. No one had ever made a demand in his home. He watched the scene up close. Sophia seemed unintimidated by the vastness of the travertine marble beneath her feet or the works of art that were worth more than entire city blocks. Her gaze was direct, focused, and her request, though unusual, contained no arrogance, only a serene conviction. He, who analyzed people as he analyzed a company's cash flow, saw something his vast fortune could not buy, a stubborn authenticity. "Miss," he began, his voice deep and controlled, planning to dismiss her before she took another step, but the words died in his throat. She brought a subtle scent with her, something that didn't belong in this climate-controlled environment. It wasn't expensive perfume. It was something like freshly baked cornbread, a memory of a simpler life he barely remembered having. She smiled slightly, a contained laugh that seemed to acknowledge her own boldness. "The energy of a space says a lot, Mr. Ashford. The place where a child spends most of his time needs to be an invitation, not a sentence." The word hit him. Sentence. It was exactly what Leo's room had become since the accident, a silent, impeccable, grey sanctuary. The curtains, always drawn, insisted on blocking out New York's pale light. He, in his frantic quest for control, for a way to repair what his absence had caused, had turned his son's refuge into an extension of his own office, functional, silent, and devoid of a soul. In a few seconds, Henry realized that the fortune he had amassed, the dollars held in offshore accounts, could not buy what this young woman with the yellow scarf brought with her. The stubborn conviction that light can get in, even when everything insists on darkness. He took a step to the side, a minimal gesture that seemed to cost him tremendous effort. "The hallway on the left," he said, his voice still gruff. But the order of dismissal forgotten. Sophia nodded gratefully and began to push the empty chair down the corridor. Henry watched her, a knot of contradictory feelings forming in his chest. This woman was a risk, an element of unpredictability in his perfectly calculated world, and for some terrifying reason, he felt he desperately needed that risk. The door to Leo's room was ajar, and Sophia stopped on the threshold, looking into the gloom before turning to him with a question that knocked the wind out of him. "What in here is still his?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, but each word echoed in the lavish hallway with the weight of an accusation. Henry felt the impact of the question like a punch to the gut. He, a man who measured the world in net worth and investment returns, was confronted with a question for which he had no answer. He had spent a fortune on that room, hiring the best architects and occupational therapists. Every piece of furniture, every expensive imported toy represented a heavy investment in his son's recovery. They were tangible assets, listed on spreadsheets, but Sophia's question exposed the brutal truth. None of it held Leo's soul. The room was a reflection of Henry's guilt, not his son's identity. He swallowed hard, the mask of control threatening to crack. He has the best of everything: state-of-the-art equipment, educational toys. The answer came out automatically, defensively, the same one he gave himself in the long, early hours of the morning. Sophia just nodded, her gaze understanding, which somehow irritated him even more. She entered the room, and Henry followed, feeling like an intruder in the space he himself had created. The dimness was broken only by the cold light of a tablet on standby. Shades of grey and navy blue dominated the environment. The toys, organized by color and size on acrylic shelves, looked like museum pieces, untouched. There wasn't a crooked drawing on the wall, a misplaced sticker, a sign of childish chaos. Sophia walked slowly, touching the perfectly stretched bedspread, observing the bookshelf filled with books that looked as if they had never been opened. Then she turned to the wide, floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sea of New York City skyscrapers. "May I?" she asked, pointing to the cord for the blinds. Henry just nodded, his voice caught in his throat. With a smooth motion, she opened them. The grey light of the rainy afternoon flooded the room, revealing dust particles dancing in the air, the only things that seemed to move in there. From her canvas tote bag, she took out a small pot with a single, stubborn sunflower. She placed it on the windowsill, its yellow color screaming against the room's monotony. "The sun comes in slowly, but it comes in," she said, more to herself than to him. It was such a small gesture, so insignificant compared to the wealth that surrounded him, but it felt like the first breath of fresh air in that apartment in months. At that moment, Henry's phone vibrated. It was Beatrice, his executive assistant. "Henry, the agency called me. Who is this woman? She's not in our security protocol. We need to maintain privacy, protect your image. An impulsive hire can create unexpected liabilities." Her voice was like ice, the personification of the order he so desperately sought. "I'll handle it," he replied sharply, and hung up. But as he turned, he saw the housekeeper, Elena, leading Leo by the hand. The boy walked with the help of a discreet leg brace, his gaze fixed on the floor, his face a mask of apathy. Sophia knelt, not in front of him, but beside him, at his eye level. She didn't say hi, didn't force an interaction. She just stayed there, in silence, waiting. And then Leo, who hadn't looked directly at anyone for months, lifted his face. His eyes didn't go to Sophia, nor to his father. They went straight to the small, solitary sunflower on the windowsill, a single point of color in his grey universe. And for the first time in a very long time, Henry saw a spark, a tiny, fragile spark of curiosity in his son's eyes. The days that followed were a lesson in subtlety. Sophia didn't try to revolutionize the household routine. She infiltrated it with life, drop by drop. It started with small things: a pitcher of water with orange slices in the kitchen, a sprig of rosemary on the coffee table. She talked to the plants the interior designers had positioned, hummed old off-key melodies while arranging Leo's toys in a way that invited touch, not admiration. Henry watched everything from a distance, from his home office, a sanctuary of screens and graphs showing the real-time fluctuation of his capital. He felt torn. On one side, Beatrice's pragmatic voice in his ear, reminding him of the risks, the need to maintain an image of strength and control, especially now that a major deal involving a European hedge fund was in its final stages. On the other, the image of the sunflower on his son's windowsill, a stubborn point of light. He tried to convince himself it was just an employment contract, a service for which he paid handsomely. But this was different. The previous nannies and therapists followed protocols, filled out reports. They were efficient, predictable. Sophia was an anarchic element. She didn't address him with the reverence his position and fortune usually commanded. She spoke to him as she spoke to Elena, with a disarming simplicity that left him without a script. She seemed not to care about the amount of gold or assets he owned. Her focus was on a universe he had forgotten how to access. On Friday, the New York sky gave them a reprieve, and a pale sun managed to break through the clouds. "It's a good day to feel the wind," Sophia said at lunchtime, not looking at anyone in particular. Leo, who usually ate in silence, looked up from his plate. Henry felt his heart race. It was an invitation, not an order. The building's private garden is empty at this hour. Henry's hesitation lasted only a moment. The memory of his son's gaze on the sunflower was stronger than his instinct for seclusion. Half an hour later, the three of them were in the garden. The air was crisp but clean. Two large Japanese maples, one crimson and one deep purple, had already lost most of their leaves, but the ground was covered in a carpet of them. Sophia pushed Leo's chair under one of the trees and sat on the damp grass, not caring about her clothes. She said nothing, didn't force an activity. She just picked up a handful of leaves and let them slip through her fingers. Henry remained standing a few feet away, arms crossed, an uncomfortable guardian of this fragile piece. Suddenly, a stronger gust of wind swept down between the high-rises. The air filled with leaves, a swirl of color that danced around them. A single crimson leaf landed gently on Leo's cheek. The boy startled, but instead of flinching, his lips curved into the ghost of a smile. The wind blew again, more insistent, rustling his hair. And then it happened. A sound Henry hadn't heard in almost a year. A laugh, faint, hesitant, almost a breath, but unmistakably a laugh. The sound shot through Henry like a shockwave. For months, he had mobilized his immense wealth, his contacts, seeking a cure in cutting-edge technologies and treatments. Every procedure, every consultation was an investment in hope. But no profit, no dividend from the stock market had ever compared to the return on that sound. It was proof that life was still there, beneath the layers of silence. With his eyes welling up, he saw Leo turn to him, his face lit by that fragile laugh. It was an invitation to share the moment. Henry took a step forward, his heart opening, ready to cross the distance that separated them. That's when a sharp voice, like shattered glass, broke the spell. "Henry, we have a problem." Beatrice was standing behind him, her face a mask of disapproval, holding a tablet that glowed with urgency. Beatrice's voice was a blade of ice cutting through the fragile warmth of that moment in the garden. "The Swiss fund is pulling back. We need a counter-proposal in 1 hour, or we risk losing a crucial investment." The mention of business, of deadlines and capital, yanked Henry back to his reality with sudden violence. Leo's laugh still echoed in his ears, but the urgency on his assistant's face forced him to rebuild his walls. He turned, his body tense, his mind already calculating interest, losses, and damages. "I'm on my way," he said, without looking back, without saying goodbye to his son, who now watched his father's retreating back, his smile slowly fading. Sophia just placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort that Henry saw out of the corner of his eye and which made him clench his fists inside his coat pockets. The rest of the week was a dive back into his natural habitat, conference calls, spreadsheets, and the constant pressure to increase his already vast fortune. The following Tuesday, however, He decided to leave the office early. A restlessness gnawed at him. The memory of Leo's laugh was a disturbing counterpoint to the monotonous hum of the crypto market on his screens. He arrived home expecting the usual silence, the immaculate order. But as he passed through the foyer, he heard a sound coming from the living room. It wasn't the television or music. It was the sound of paper tearing, and underneath it, Sophia's soft voice and Leo's monosyllabic but presentient responses. He stopped, hidden by the curve of the wall. What he saw left him paralyzed. In the middle of his Persian rug, worth more than a luxury car, was a colorful mess. Sophia and Leo were sitting on the floor, surrounded by pages from a business magazine he recognized as his own. Bamboo sticks, the kind used in floral arrangements, and a roll of string completed the chaos. They were building a kite made from stock market graphs and articles about the fluctuation of the dollar. Henry felt a surge of irrational fury. It was a desecration of his world, an invasion. He opened his mouth to reprimand them, to restore order, to remind her of her place. But then Leo laughed, a stronger laugh this time, as Sophia attached a red silk ribbon for a tail. And the boy, who for months had barely lifted his head, looked toward the door and saw his father. The joy didn't die on his face. On the contrary, his eyes lit up. He held out his hand, not to ask for help, but to include. "Dad," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Come." The simple word, just 3 letters, demolished all of Henry's defenses. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. He felt a lump form in his throat, so tight it ached. Slowly, as if his Italian leather shoes weighed a ton, he crossed the room and sat on the floor beside them. The gesture was awkward, foreign to his body accustomed to ergonomic chairs. But when his fingers touched the paper, the same paper that represented his wealth, he felt something no financial asset had ever given him: connection. Minutes later, the 3 of them were in the garden again. The kite rose, clumsily, dancing in the cold New York wind. For a moment, Henry allowed himself to feel the peace. That's when a stronger gust stretched the line to its limit. And it snapped. The kite, made of his fortune, now free, began to fall toward the neighboring buildings. Henry's instinct was frustration, the loss of control. But then he heard Sophia's loud, infectious laugh as she was already getting up to run. He saw Leo pointing, his face pure adrenaline, and to his complete astonishment, Henry Ashford, the billionaire who loathed improvisation, laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that came from deep within his soul. And the 3 of them ran together across the wet grass, chasing a toy made of old news under the city's grey sky. After they recovered the kite, breathless and smudged with dirt, Henry looked at Sophia, who was smiling at him. In that moment, he realized she wasn't just taking care of his son. She was slowly dismantling the fortress he had built around his heart, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to stop. The chase after the kite broke an invisible barrier. The atmosphere in the penthouse, once heavy and silent, began to transform. Henry found himself coming home earlier, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine curiosity about what he would find. The impeccable order was giving way to a creative and affectionate clutter. One day, he found the lacquered dining table, normally reserved for business dinners, covered with old newspapers and jars of paint. Leo, a thick brush in his hand, was painting a canary yellow sun, while Sophia, her face smudged with blue, tried to draw a tree. On another afternoon, the smell of something burning led him to the kitchen, a room he usually only passed through. There, he found the 2 of them in a cloud of flour, trying to flip pancakes in the air. Sophia's first attempt stuck to the ceiling, and Leo's laugh was so loud it echoed through the apartment. Henry leaned against the doorframe, just watching. He, who had built an empire based on efficiency and perfect results, was witnessing the beauty of error, of trying, of laughter. Sophia, noticing his presence, didn't apologize for the mess. Instead, she held out a spatula to him. "Your turn," The secret is in the wrist. To his own astonishment, he accepted. His first pancake broke in half, the second folded weirdly, but the third, with the help of Sophia's playful instructions and Leo's applause, flipped in the air and landed perfectly in the pan. In that moment, flipping a simple pancake felt like a greater achievement than closing a multi-million-dollar deal. They started having dinner together, not in the formal dining room, but at the kitchen table, which had previously been the exclusive territory of the staff. Elena, the housekeeper, seemed shocked at first, but soon gave in to the new dynamic, often joining the conversations with stories of her childhood in Ecuador. One of those nights, as they ate the simple pasta Sophia had prepared, served on ordinary plates with grape juice in thick glass tumblers, Leo raised his glass. He looked at his father, then at Sophia, and said with childlike seriousness, "A toast to the sun. It comes in slowly, but it comes in." Henry felt his eyes burn. The phrase, which had once irritated him, now sounded like a mantra, a symbol of this quiet transformation. The phrase represented Sophia, the way she had entered their lives without fanfare but with a luminous persistence. He raised his glass, his heart overflowing with an emotion he couldn't name. Leo's progress was undeniable. He was more talkative, more engaged, and his physical therapist noted an improvement in his disposition and coordination. The next step was to try a trial class at his old school, a step Henry had been postponing, afraid of a setback. But Sophia encouraged him. He doesn't have to be perfect, he just has to try. The day of the trial class arrived. Henry, tense, accompanied them. The ride was smooth, with Leo chattering about the classmates he might see again. But when the school elevator doors closed, the small metal box seemed to suck all the air out. Leo stopped talking. His breath grew short, his eyes wide with panic. It was a memory of the accident, which had happened inside a car, a closed, claustrophobic space. Henry froze, guilt paralyzing him. "Leo, breathe, son. We're almost there," he said, but his voice came out shaky, ineffective. It was Sophia who acted. She knelt in front of the wheelchair, took Leo's small, sweaty hands, and began to breathe deeply, rhythmically, and audibly. "Look at me, Leo. Breathe with me. Breathe in. Now out slowly." She didn't panic. Her calm was an anchor. Then she began to hum softly, a lullaby Henry had never heard. The melody was simple, almost hypnotic. Gradually, Leo's breathing began to sync with hers. The terror in his eyes subsided, replaced by a fragile trust. When the elevator doors opened, he was calm. The school principal, who was waiting for them, observed the scene with a mixture of concern and admiration. The crisis had been averted, but the incident had not gone unnoticed. And down the hall, Henry saw Beatrice, who had insisted on being present, speaking discreetly with the principal. The polished smile on her face didn't hide the calculating glint in her eyes. She saw Sophia not as a savior, but as a risk variable, a threat to the narrative of privacy and perfection she worked so hard to maintain. The meeting in the principal's office with Mr. Davies was an exercise in politeness and veiled concern. The room, decorated with colorful student drawings, contrasted with the seriousness of the conversation. He praised Sophia's composure during Leo's panic attack, acknowledging her skill. "It was a remarkable display of empathy and technique," he admitted, adjusting his glasses. However, the episode itself shows us that Leo's reintroduction to the school environment needs to be extremely cautious. He suggested a gradual adaptation plan, with short visits and intensive therapeutic support. It was a sensible proposal, but between the lines, Henry heard a confirmation of Beatrice's concerns. The school saw a risk, and its job was to mitigate risks. On the way back, the silence inside the armored car was heavy. Beatrice, in the front seat, typed furiously on her tablet. But Henry knew she was aware of every nuance of the situation. She didn't need to say, "I told you so." Her efficient, impassive presence said it all. As soon as they arrived at the penthouse, she followed him to his office. "Henry, we need to be pragmatic," she began, her voice low and controlled. "This woman, however well-intentioned, lacks formal credentials. What she did in the elevator was luck, not method. Relying on her is a risk to Leo's emotional stability and, frankly, to your image." She gestured toward the city beyond the window. We are about to close the biggest deal of your career. Investors value stability, predictability. Any sign of domestic drama, any story that might leak, could be seen as a liability. The narrative needs to be one of controlled recovery, not of improvisations and miracle nannies." Every word was a calculated blow, mixing concern for his son with the protection of his assets. Two things that, in Henry's mind, had become dangerously intertwined. He felt cornered. He had seen what Sophia did, had felt the change in his home and in his son. That wasn't luck, it was something deeper. But Beatrice's logic was the logic he had used to build his fortune, a logic of controlling variables and minimizing losses. He dismissed her with a nod, his mind a whirlwind. He walked to Leo's room. The boy was asleep, exhausted from the day. On the windowsill, the sunflower seemed a little wilted, as if sensing the tension in the air. Beside the bed, a drawing pad was open, showing a sketch of the kite flying over the maple trees in the garden. They were childish lines, but full of life. Henry felt a wave of anger at himself. How could he allow the cold language of business, of assets and liabilities, to contaminate this small sanctuary of hope? He sat in the armchair, watching his son sleep, and made a decision. He would defend Sophia. He would defend this new, fragile balance she had brought. It didn't matter what Beatrice or the investors thought. Leo's well-being was not an item on a cash flow spreadsheet. It was in this moment of resolution that his personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code was for the agency that had hired Sophia. He answered, expecting a routine report. "Mr. Ashford," a professional voice said on the other end. "This is Helen from the agency. I'm just calling for the final procedures. As her performance was excellent, we were wondering if you'd be interested in giving us a reference for her next job." Henry frowned. "Next job? I don't understand." There was a confused pause. "Yes, as agreed. Miss Sophia's temporary service contract ends this coming Friday. We were not informed that there was interest in a renewal." The agency's revelation fell on Henry like a slab of cold concrete. Temporary contract. Ends on Friday. The words spun in his mind. Absurd and unacceptable. He, a man who controlled complex businesses and anticipated market moves months in advance, hadn't seen what was happening under his own roof. The control he so prized was an illusion. He had delegated, automated, outsourced his son's care as he would the management of one of his investment funds. And now the most valuable asset in his life was about to be liquidated. His first impulse was fury. He dialed Beatrice's number, his voice sharp. "Sophia's contract. Why wasn't I informed it was temporary?" On the other end of the line, Beatrice's calm was unnerving. "Henry, it was standard procedure. A trial period. It's risk management. I suggested it to the agency myself. Imagine if she didn't work out. It would be a complicated process to break the contract. This way, we have a clean, discreet exit." Clean exit. The phrase disgusted him. There was nothing clean about the idea of tearing Sophia out of Leo's life, out of their lives. He hung up without responding, his chest tight with an urgency he hadn't felt since the night of the accident. It was the same feeling of helplessness, the same guilt for not paying enough attention. He walked through the apartment, looking for her. He found her on the balcony, watering the sunflower, which now shared its pot with a small basil sprout. She was humming softly, oblivious to the crisis that had taken hold in his mind. He wanted to explode, to demand she stay, to offer her double, triple, whatever amount of money was necessary. But looking at her so serene, he realized his vast capital was the wrong tool for this negotiation. She wasn't a stock to be bought. She was a person who had to choose to stay. The week passed in a blur of tension. Henry could barely concentrate on work. Every laugh from Leo, every small interaction with Sophia was tinged with a silent desperation. He knew he had to talk to her, but the words failed him. What could he say? Please don't go. I'll pay whatever it takes. It would be an insult to the dignity he so admired in her. On Thursday morning, a particularly cold and grey morning, he made a decision. He went into Leo's room before the boy woke up and, instead of waiting for Sophia to do it, he opened the curtains himself. "We're going to Central Park," he said when Leo and Sophia arrived for breakfast. Now, it was an impulse, a break in the routine, an attempt to create a memory, to hold on to the present. In the park, the cold air nipped at their faces. The morning mist still hovered over the lake, creating a dreamlike landscape. Bundled up, the three of them stood in silence, watching the hypnotic rhythm of a rowing crew, their long, thin boats cutting through the dark water. The sound of the oars was the only noise, a steady, calming beat. Henry looked at his son. Leo was watching the boats with intense concentration, his face serene. This was his son, back. Not the apathetic boy, but a curious, present child. It was Leo who broke the silence. He turned not to Sophia but to his father, and his eyes were serious, filled with an almost painful hope. "Dad," he said, his voice a little shaky from the cold, "can I go to the school's fall festival?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't about the festival. It was about belonging again, about believing there was a place for him in the world out there. Henry felt the weight of the request. Saying yes was easy, but ensuring that the joy that made the question possible would still be there was the real challenge. He looked from Leo to Sophia, whose contract would expire in less than 24 hours, and knew that this question was not a simple childish wish. It was the turning point. It was the battle he had to win. Henry's yes was the catalyst for a complex operation. Beatrice, reluctantly, was tasked with ensuring the school's fall festival was a safe and controlled environment. The result was a makeshift fair in the covered courtyard, a microcosm of a city striving to be welcoming. There was a contained bonfire inside an enclosure. Colorful banners hung well out of children's reach, and a designated area for folk dancing with accessibility in mind, allowing wheelchairs to join the large circle. The smell of roasted corn and non-alcoholic apple cider hung in the air, mixing with the sound of cheerful music. For Leo, it was paradise. He, who had lived for months in a cocoon of silence, was immersed in colors, sounds, and flavors. With Sophia's help, he played the fishing game, knocked down cans with a ball, and ate caramel corn that crumbled between his fingers, laughing with his mouth full. Henry watched from a safe distance, his heart torn between the joy of seeing his son and a paralyzing anxiety about the future. With every one of Leo's smiles, the deadline of Sophia's contract weighed more heavily on his conscience. It was then that he saw her, Camilla, his ex-partner and Leo's mother, crossing the courtyard with quiet determination. Elegant and tense, she was not a hostile presence, but her terrified mother-wolf eyes scanned the scene for her son. She found him next to Sophia, laughing as he tried to toss a ring onto a bottle. The relief on Camilla's face was immediately followed by an expression of deep concern. She approached Henry, her voice low but firm. "What is this, Henry? A festival. He's not ready for this kind of exposure. I saw the video of the kite that a neighbor posted. Everyone is talking about it." She took a deep breath, trying to control her panic. "I spoke with the doctors. There's a new treatment in Switzerland, a rehabilitation center with the best specialists in the world. No exposure, no improvisations. I want to take him. It's what's best for him." The proposal was a bombshell, logical, well-intentioned, and coming from a terrified mother. It was almost irrefutable. Henry, caught between the affection he saw before him and the responsibility to seek the best clinical solution, could only say, "I need to think." Later, while Henry was buying more game tickets for Leo, he saw the scene that would define the night. Camilla approached Sophia, who was wiping caramel corn crumbs from the boy's face. The two women, fighting for care, not territory, faced each other for a moment. "What do you really want?" Camilla asked, her voice blunt. Sophia looked up, and there was no submission in her gaze, only a disarming serenity. "The same thing you do, I imagine. For Leo to be happy." She paused, her eyes fixed on Camilla's. "My job is here, with him, on the living room floor, in the garden wind, in the middle of a messy festival. I help build his joy in the now. The decision about the future, about where he'll be safest, that's for you." His parents. The raw honesty of the answer seemed to surprise Camilla. She hadn't found a rival, but an ally with different methods, someone who defined a clear boundary of her role and respect. She nodded, a silent truce established between them. Across the courtyard, Henry watched it all, feeling even more lost. He was caught between two visions of love, both valid, both powerful, and his time to decide was running out. Tomorrow was Friday, and he had no idea what to do. Friday arrived with the punctuality of an executioner. The sun of the fall festival gave way to a low, heavy sky, the color of lead that seemed to press down on the New York City skyscrapers. In the apartment, the silence had returned, but it was different. It was no longer an empty silence, but one full of unsaid words, of farewells hanging in the air. Henry found Sophia in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as if it were any other day. The smell of fresh coffee, which used to bring him comfort, now felt like a timer, marking the minutes that remained. He poured himself a cup, his hand slightly trembling. She turned to get the milk from the refrigerator, and as she placed the carton on the counter, her fingers brushed against his, which was still holding the cup's handle. It was an electric, accidental touch that made both of them pull back as if burned. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, Henry saw a universe of hesitation and sadness in her eyes. He looked away first, his heart hammering against his ribs. He, a multimillionaire who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, couldn't hold the gaze of a young woman in a yellow scarf. Later, while Leo was busy with a puzzle, Sophia's phone rang. She moved to the laundry room to answer, but the glass door was left ajar, and Henry, frozen in his office, couldn't help but overhear fragments of the conversation. "Yes, I understand. It's a wonderful proposal, a bilingual school. Yes, the sensory playroom project. They want it to be the school's signature feature. Wow. I need some time to think. By the end of the day, right. Thank you." Each word was a shovel of dirt on Henry's hopes. It was logical. A career opportunity, a project that was her passion, probably with a salary and benefits he, in his arrogance, hadn't even thought to match. He had only thought of his own desire for her to stay, not what was best for her. The injustice of the situation hit him. He had the power, the fortune, to solve almost anything, but his hands were tied. If he forced her to stay, he would be clipping her wings. If he let her go, he would be condemning himself and Leo to return to the darkness. It was in this moment of anguish that Beatrice entered his office. Without knocking, she carried a leather portfolio and an expression of relentless efficiency. "Henry, the company's board held an emergency meeting. The instability in the crypto market is affecting some of our investments, and the Swiss partners are using it as leverage. They demand your full attention. They're concerned about what they're calling Domestic distractions. She opened the portfolio on his desk. Inside were detailed profiles. With impressive photos and resumes, they've made a recommendation, which I fully support. It's time to end the improvisational phase and reinstate a purely therapeutic regimen for Leo. This is the best team of specialists in the country. Psychologists, physical therapists, educational specialists. They work in an integrated way with daily progress reports. It's the definitive solution. It guarantees the best care for Leo and projects the image of stability and control that your assets require at this moment. Henry looked at the smiling, professional faces on the papers. They were the embodiment of logic, efficiency, method. They were the antithesis of Sophia. "They can start on Monday," Beatrice concluded, pushing a pen toward him. "I just need your signature to formalize the contracts and terminate the current temporary service." The night of the charity gala at the Met was the perfect stage for Henry's world. Under the iconic Grand Arches, New York's financial and cultural elite gathered, a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. The air crackled with conversations about deals, the profitability of new ventures, and the volatility of the gold market. Henry felt like an actor in a well-rehearsed play. Beatrice, at his side, was the director, ensuring he played his part. "Your speech on resilience will be the highlight, Henry. It's the perfect narrative. The billionaire who faces personal adversity with the same strength he uses to manage his fortune." Her words sounded hollow, a distant echo of the reality he had been experiencing. He stepped up to the podium, spoke the words written for him, and the applause came right on cue. But his eyes were searching for a different audience. Across the hall, near the immense glass windows overlooking the illuminated city, were Sophia and Leo. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress and was sharing a bag of popcorn with the boy. Both of them fascinated by the lights of the city below. They were an island of truth in an ocean of appearances. As a string quartet played, Henry approached them. Leo was focused on a sketchbook that Henry didn't immediately recognize. "What are you drawing, champ?" he asked, his voice softer than the one he'd used in his speech. Leo opened the sketchbook for him, but the drawings weren't Leo's. They were detailed, almost technical sketches of sensory playrooms made from cardboard, plastic bottles, and Velcro. There were notes in the margins about zero-cost materials, sensory stimulation, and accessibility. They were Sophia's drawings. They were her dreams. She looked up, her face flushed, surprised and vulnerable. Henry just nodded, a minimal gesture. "I found it in your bag the day you arrived. I thought it would be safer with me." In that look exchanged over a sketchbook, in the middle of the crowd, a truth was established. He had seen her from the beginning. He hadn't just seen a nanny. He had seen the project, the passion, the soul. The ride home was silent, but the tension was palpable. Later, as he was putting Leo to bed, the boy held his hand. "Dad," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the paper kite hanging from the ceiling. "I'm scared to laugh." A chill ran down Henry's spine. "Scared, son? Why?" Leo's answer came like a punch, knocking down Henry's last wall. "Because when I laugh, I forget, and then it hurts to remember." The confession, so simple and so devastating, explained everything. It explained the apathy, the resistance, the sadness that returned after every moment of joy. Henry finally understood the depth of the wound, and he realized that all his money, all his fortune, could not heal it. The final blow came the next morning. Beatrice was waiting for him in his office, her face a mask of calculated concern. She showed him a story on a well-known news portal. The headline was discreet but venomous: "Guardian Angel or Gold Digger, the mysterious nanny getting close to a famous billionaire's son." The article, citing sources close to the family, insinuated that the nanny had ulterior motives, using the boy's fragility to promote herself. The video of the kite in the garden, once a symbol of joy, was now presented as proof of an attempt to go viral and gain notoriety. "The fallout is just beginning, Henry," Beatrice said, her voice grave. "We need to act. We need to protect the family's privacy, protect Leo." The trap was set, and he saw no way out. The most painful decision of his life was made in seconds, but it would weigh on him for an eternity. He had to send her away. The conversation was short and clinical. In the foyer, the words "temporarily" and "protect the family" sounded false even to him. Sophia didn't cry. She just looked at him with a disappointment so profound it cut deeper than any accusation. She packed a small bag, said goodbye to Leo with a tight, silent hug, and walked to the door. The click of the lock was the loudest sound Henry had ever heard. The apartment returned to silence, and in the darkness of his own creation, he realized, with terrifying clarity, that the absence of her voice cost more than any contract, more than any asset. It was a loss he didn't know how to begin to calculate. Sophia's absence was like a vacuum that sucked all the color and sound from the apartment. The therapeutic team hired by Beatrice started on Monday with robotic efficiency. They were punctual, professional, and followed strict protocols. They filled out reports, applied techniques, but they didn't sing off-key songs or make pancakes stick to the ceiling. For Leo, it was as if the sun had been switched off again. He retreated into himself, the apathy returning like a dense fog. Physical therapy sessions became an exercise in passive resistance, and his communication, once flowing, regressed to monosyllables. Henry watched it all from his office, feeling like a prisoner in his own luxury home. The wealth that surrounded him, the numbers climbing on his screens, seemed like a mockery. He had all the resources, but he had lost the only one that truly mattered. The early morning hours became his companions. Unable to sleep, he would wander through the silent apartment. One of these nights, with a fine drizzle blanketing the city outside, he sat in the armchair in Leo's room, watching his son sleep a restless sleep. Sophia's sketchbook was on the nightstand. He picked it up and began to flip through the pages, no longer with the haste of a furtive glance, but with the attention of someone seeking answers. He read every note, studied every sketch. He saw the care in the details, the ingenuity in transforming scrap materials into toys that stimulated imagination and coordination. On the last page, there was an address written down, 78 Palmer Street, Soho Community Center. Next to it, a reminder, project presentation, 3 p.m. The date was from the week she had started working for him. The truth hit him with the force of lightning. He grabbed his tablet and, with trembling hands, searched for the address of the agency that had hired her. It was on 112 Palmer Street. Just a few hundred feet from the community center, it all fell into place. She hadn't sought him out. She hadn't targeted him. She was at the right agency, on the right street, on the right day, looking for a temporary job that would give her the flexibility to present the project of her life. He, Henry Ashford, the great strategist, hadn't been a target. He had been a coincidence. The revelation was both humiliating and liberating. Beatrice's narrative, the idea that he was an asset to be exploited, collapsed. Sophia didn't want his money. She wanted to realize her dream, and fate had placed her in his path for a brief period. The guilt he felt transformed. It was no longer just guilt over the accident, but guilt for having doubted, for having given in to pressure, for having believed the most cynical version of the story. Loving, he realized, wasn't about maintaining control or authority. It was about choosing the right priority, and he had chosen the wrong one. Driven by a new clarity, he spent the rest of the night working, not on his businesses, not on his stocks, but on Sophia's project. He used his financial expertise to turn her passionate sketches into a viable business plan. He calculated costs, projected social outreach, and outlined a funding model. For the first time in years, he wasn't working to accumulate more wealth for himself. but to bring someone else's dream to life. By dawn, the rain had stopped. He looked out at the awakening city, the lights coming on in the buildings. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about bringing Sophia back. It was about becoming the man who was worthy of her love and trust. It was about using his immense fortune not as a shield, but as a tool to build something real and lasting. Something that no fluctuation in the crypto market or treasury yields could ever shake. The night of the annual investors' gala arrived, but the tuxedo the housekeeper had laid out impeccably on Henry's bed remained untouched. Instead of heading to the event, he made a single call, summoning an emergency meeting with his company's board for the following morning. It was an act of quiet rebellion. The first time he had put his personal life ahead of the business that consumed his existence. The next morning, in the boardroom atop one of Wall Street's tallest skyscrapers, the tension was palpable. The board members, men and women accustomed to discussing profits and dividends in astronomical figures, looked at him with a mixture of impatience and curiosity. They were expecting a strategy to contain losses in the volatile crypto market. But Henry placed on the polished mahogany table not a tablet with graphs, but Sophia's sketchbook. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and clear, "today we are not going to talk about how to grow our capital. We are going to talk about how to truly invest it." He presented the Accessible Playroom project, not as an act of charity, but as a new and revolutionary branch of social investment for the company. He proposed the creation of a Children's Accessibility Institute, funded by a percentage of the company's profits, with Sophia's project as a pilot in a public school in Soho. The murmur in the room was one of shock. Beatrice, seated to his right, immediately intervened, her voice polished but sharp as steel. "Henry, with all due respect, this is an emotional liability, not a strategic asset. The company's image cannot be tied to an amateur project, conceived by a person whose character is, at best, questionable." It was her mistake. One of the older board members, a man who prized ethics above all, raised an eyebrow. "Questionable? Beatrice, the story that was leaked cited sources close to the family. How could you state that with such certainty, unless the source wasn't just close, but internal?" Beatrice turned pale. In her arrogance, she had exposed herself. The silence that followed was her sentence. Her fall was as swift and quiet as her rise. With the board on his side, Henry's next call was to Camilla. He didn't ask, he informed, "Leo isn't going to Switzerland. We are going to build his world here." He explained about the institute, the partnership with the school, about giving Leo the chance to grow up in his own city, with the support of a real structure, born not from marketing, but from genuine purpose. Camilla, on the other end of the line, was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "This is the first time, Henry, that I've seen you act like a father and not a crisis manager. He can stay." With the two biggest obstacles removed, the most important one remained. A desperate call to the agency revealed that Sophia was leaving. She had accepted the offer from the bilingual school in another city and was catching a bus that afternoon from the Port Authority bus terminal. Henry didn't delegate the task to a driver. He drove himself, cutting through the New York City traffic with an urgency that came from his soul. The terminal was a chaos of sounds, smells, and people. Under the echo of platform announcements and the hiss of bus engines, he ran, his heart pounding, searching for one face in the crowd. And then he saw her. Near Gate 12, holding a small suitcase, she was about to get in the boarding line. Her yellow scarf wasn't in her hair, but tied around her wrist, a final flag of her identity. He pushed his way through the people, his breath short. "Sophia!" he yelled, his voice nearly swallowed by the noise. She stopped, her body stiff. And then, slowly, she turned around. Sophia's face, as she turned, was a canvas of contained emotions. There was surprise, yes, but also a deep exhaustion and a layer of pain that hit him squarely. Her eyes didn't shine with tears, but with a wounded clarity. She saw him, but she didn't seem to see the multimillionaire accustomed to giving orders, but rather the man who had sent her away. Henry stopped a few feet from her, breathless, his heart racing with fear and exertion. The noise of the terminal, the boarding call for Albany, the screech of a bus's brakes, the loud chatter of a family seemed to fade away, creating a bubble of silence just for the two of them. "Don't go," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of all authority. It was a plea, pure and simple. "Sophia, please, stay." She just watched him, her face impassive, waiting, and he understood he had to offer more than empty words. "I know I was wrong," he continued, taking a step forward. "I acted out of fear, out of pressure, and I let the cold logic of business win. But that logic is wrong. I fired Beatrice. The board knows the truth now. And I spoke with Camilla. Leo is staying. He's staying here." He paused, gathering his breath and his courage. "I spent the night reading your project. Not just reading, studying. It's brilliant. And I don't just want to fund it. I want to be your partner, not as your boss, but as a partner, to build the institute, to bring your ideas to every school we can, to be by your side and by Leo's side, not as an employee, Sophia, as a partner in this project. And in life." The last part came out almost as a whisper, the riskiest confession of all. Sophia, for the first time, let her emotion show. A single, stubborn tear escaped, and she quickly wiped it away. "It's not about the project, Henry, and it was never about your money or your fortune," she said, her voice steady despite it all. "It's about trust. I gave you and your son my best. I opened myself up to you, and when things got difficult, you discarded me like I was a liability on your balance sheet." The words were harsh because they were true. "If I stay," she continued, and his heart stopped for an instant, "things have to be different. I need total transparency. No more secrets and assistants making decisions for our lives. I need space. Space to be myself, with my ideas and my methods, without having to prove my worth at every turn. And most of all, I need time. Time to believe I can trust you again." He didn't hesitate. "You'll have all of it. Anything you ask for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then he gave her the one thing his fortune couldn't buy, his raw, unvarnished truth. "The guilt is mine," he confessed. His eyes locked on hers, exposing the wound that had governed him for so long. "Leo's accident. It happened when I was on my way to a meeting, a stock trade I thought couldn't wait. I wasn't there. And every day since, I've tried to control everything and everyone around me so I would never feel that powerless again. I turned his room, his life, my life, into a fortress. But it wasn't to protect him. It was to protect myself from this guilt." The announcement for the final boarding call for her bus sounded over the loudspeaker. It was now or never. She looked at the bus, then back at him, the man who had just demolished his own walls in front of her. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her hand was warm, and the touch was the answer. The bus left without her. And there, amidst the chaos of the terminal, they began to find their way back home, together. The first weeks of winter arrived in New York, bringing a chill that invited people to stay indoors. In the Upper East Side penthouse, however, the windows were now opened every day to let the cold air in to circulate. The most significant change was not in the decor, but in the atmosphere. The old rigidity had given way to a warm flexibility, filled with laughter and the constant smell of coffee and cake. The Institute was in its initial stages, with Sophia and Henry sharing the office, cash flow spreadsheets and social return projections on one side of the desk, and colorful sketches of recycled toys on the other. They had become partners in every sense, building bridges between their two worlds with patience and respect. Henry discovered that true profit wasn't in the dividends from his stocks, but in the quiet joy of watching his son, and the woman he loved drawing the future together. The third and most important turning point didn't happen with the noise of a signed contract or a media headline. It was a whisper, a quiet miracle. One afternoon, during a physical therapy session on the balcony, as the cold wind blew, Leo closed his eyes, concentrating. "Wait," he said to the therapist. I felt it. It was a tingling, a tiny sign of sensation in the tip of his left foot, something the most expensive tests hadn't predicted. It wasn't a cure, it wasn't a promise that he would run again, but it was something. It was a spark. And it was enough to rekindle the courage that the fear of remembering had tried to extinguish. That weekend, he was the one who made the request. "I want to fly the kite again," he said, looking at his father and Sophia. "In our garden." The three of them went down. The winter wind bit at their faces, but no one seemed to mind. The leftover banners from the fall festival still fluttered on a neighbor's balcony, a colorful memory of their journey. The city, with its constant hum, seemed to purr below, a quiet witness to the scene. Henry held the reel of string, Sophia guided the wheelchair, and Leo held the kite, now made of blue and yellow tissue paper. When the wind lifted it, the boy didn't hesitate. He let go of the tail and watched the toy rise, dancing against the grey sky, and then he laughed, loudly, freely, without fear of forgetting or remembering. He just laughed, because the joy of the moment was all that mattered. Henry passed the string to his son's hand, placing his own over it, guiding, supporting. Sophia rested her hand on his shoulder, and the three of them stood there, watching the kite fly. Between the cold on their faces and the smell of damp earth, they understood. Balance wasn't a destination, but a daily decision. Every victory would take effort, and that was okay. Their new life was born in the conscious choice to open the window every day, slowly, but without ever giving up. As the afternoon sun began to fade between the buildings, they reeled in the kite. Before going back inside, Leo pointed to the pot where the first sunflower had withered, giving way to the thriving basil. "Can we plant another one?" he asked, his gaze serious and filled with a newfound wisdom. "A really big one, for when the sun takes a while to come in." Henry looked at Sophia, his eyes full of a love that had finally found its place, an investment whose return was immeasurable, surpassing any treasure, inheritance, or material possession he had ever imagined owning. She smiled, and in that smile was the promise of all the days to come. He knelt in front of his son, the most powerful man on Wall Street, and agreed they would plant as many sunflowers as they needed to,